Welcome back, new viewers and gamers. It is time for the ninth edition to Unused content in Pokemon Black and White, and we are continuing this here part of Unused content in games. So now we're going to continue from Unused Pokemon data after we looked at the notes and these other things in the previous episode. So without further ado, let us begin. But before we begin, I do gaming content like this all the time, so if that's the type of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel for free and you can always change your mind later on. Anyways, starting off with an unused Manaphy, which if you guys didn't know in the Generation 4 game, thanks to one of the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games at the time, if you beat that game you could transfer a Manaphy, reminiscent of the one in the Temple of the Sea movie, into the Gen 4 games to hatch it there, and it looks like that was originally going to be a thing in Generation 5, or specifically in Black and White. Carried over from the last generation, this Manaphy, while it cannot be obtained under normal circumstances, it works perfectly fine when hacked into the player's party. All of its sound effects and graphics were carried over. Its battle sprite did receive a bouncing animation like the regular Pokemon X, as well as an updated version of its unique hatching animation. The party menu icons were left untouched, though the existence of this implies that Manaphy Egg distribution may have been planned for Generation 5, seeing how Pokemon Eggs cannot be transferred into these games. Alright, and let's get a closer look at this. Although Manaphy's eggs was never distributed to the player in these games. Let's just skip this for a little bit. It works exactly like in Gen 4, but like normal eggs are received with a bouncing animation, it is used when viewing the status screen. Interestingly, Pokemon Rangers is still found among the event locations in Gen 5. Maybe it was possible to receive a Manaphy from the Pokemon Ranger in Gen 5 at some point. Oh, neat hatching animation. It's also possible that there were plans for a new Pokemon Ranger game. We will never know, though. It's all speculation. Manaphy Eggs cannot be found in newer games starting Gen 6. However, Manaphy Eggs was distributed again in BDSP. Yeah, like we totally care about that game. Anyways, continuing on now to unobtainable shiny Pokemon. For the sake of consistency, every Pokemon in every Pokemon game is given a shiny variant. Most shiny Pokemon have been obtained through random chance encounters or event distributions, including most legendary Pokemon. However, a few Pokemon cannot be obtained in this form without hacking, and as a consequence, normal players would never be able to see their shiny colorations due to some shiny locks and whatnot. Starting our Reshiram and Zekrom over here. These guys actually have really cool shinies, though. It's too bad you never got to get them in Gen 5. But you can in later generations. Like this golden color, Reshiram even has red fire, or purple fire instead of red fire. As for Zekrom having green lightning, and being this tealish blue color they got going on over here. Seriously, such good shinies in my opinion. These legendary Pokemon are encountered via fixed in-game battles, in the climax of the game's story. However, they are restricted to never be shiny, just so... That's basically Game Freak saying, hey, focus on story, not shiny hunting pansies. Not that I'm calling everybody pansy. Just saying what Game Freak might be thinking. Now, shiny Reshiram and Zekrom became legitimately obtainable in-game in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire thanks to catching legendary Pokemon in that game. Victini, to this day, at the time of making this video, it's still not possible to get Victini in any Pokemon game outside of hacking. Unlike Keldeo and Meloetta later on, thanks to Generation 8 and 9 Pokemon Home. Generation 8 for Keldeo, Gen 8, and then Gen 8 and 9 for Keldeo, and Gen 9 for Meloetta. Victini also encountered in battle, but during a distribution-based event, like Reshiram and Zekrom, Victini is set to never be shiny. Keldeo and Meloetta, these mythical Pokemon were only obtainable through special distributions via Mystery Gift. A Pokemon obtained from Mystery Gift cannot be shiny unless distributed as such, and no distributions of these Pokemon in their shiny forms are ever planned. The shiny variation of Genesect, the fourth mythical Pokemon of Gen 5, was distributed in some Asian countries, and following the premiere of the 16th Pokemon movie, and Genesect and Legend Awakened, by the way, whereas shiny Meloetta would not be distributed until Pokemon Home. Unused hidden abilities. In the Generation 5 games, it is possible to find Pokemon with special hidden abilities. However, some Pokemon cannot be encountered with hidden abilities through any legitimate means, rendering the hidden abilities unused in normal gameplay. And as I've went through in previous videos, here is the whole list of them, and I'm only going to speak on the more notable ones. Kind of like Zapdos with Lightning Rod, but honestly is better than it getting static in later games. Snowcloak and Flame Body would stick for the other two, though, in later games. I guess I thought Lightning Rod would be broken on Zapdos. Wouldn't be that broken, but okay. The Gen 2 starters, that won't become a thing till Gen 6. Raikou, Entei, and Suicune were originally going to have Volt Absorb, Flash Fire, and Water Absorb before all of them being changed to Inner Focus in Generation 7. The Regis still have all of these abilities in later games. U-Train still having Flame Body in later games, that Flash Fire is way better. Gen 5 stars wouldn't have access to their hiddens till Gen 6. Theta itself was originally going to have Shadow Tag until its evolutions later got it. Clink with Clear Body ability will have in later games, but as I mentioned in previous episodes, the entire Litwick line with Shadow Tag would have been busted, but in later games starting in Gen 6, it would end up having Infiltrator as its end ability instead, which is still a pretty decent ability in my opinion, but not as good. Rufflet, having Hustle, and not too much. Not that groundbreaking, I'd say. And Larvestone and Volcarona having Swarm, they would have in later games. Note, the Gothita, Clink, and Rufflet's evolutions had hidden abilities that are obtainable. However, because these hidden abilities were only given to males, or in the case of Clink, genderless Pokemon, obtaining these hidden abilities through breeding is impossible. In the Gen 5 games, the new breeding mechanics of the Gen 6 games gave Gothita, Rufflet, and Clink their previously unobtainable hidden abilities, using Dittos and stuff. Our Larvesta and Volcarona can now be found with their hidden abilities in the Gen 6 games. The Unova and Johto starters, along with the legendary birds and golems, were distributed with their hidden abilities in event distributions in Gen 6. Also of note is that Litwick, Lampent, and Chandelure, hidden abilities in the Gen 6 games, were changed from Shadow Attack to Infiltrator. These Pokemon could now be found in the Gen 6 games with Infiltrator. Septus' hidden abilities changed to Static in Gen 6. Forward can be seen with its ability in the Battle Mason. Cheating! Well, maybe not cheating, but whatever. Alright, I shouldn't have said that, I guess. It can be obtained with this ability from an event distribution. In the Generation 7 games, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune's hidden abilities were all changed to Inner Focus. For Entei, that's pretty good. The other two, not as much, I guess, but still decently useful, I guess. Now obtainable by transferring from Virtual Console Gold Silver Crystal to Sun, Moon, Ultra Sun, and Ultra Moon. Alright, unused Dream World data. Alright, Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver's overworld sprites from every Pokemon from Gen 1 through 4 still remains in the data of Black and White. These sprites are intended to be used for Pokemon encounters in the Entry Forest. Roughly half of the Pokemon were attainable through the Dream World in some way. For most evolutionary lines, at least one Pokemon was distributed. However, most evolutions, legendaries, and some other exceptions were never distributed, rendering their graphics as well as level data completely unused. Every Pokemon introduced in Gen 5 had no proper sprite or level. And the level data is refined in a list file. The developers took some factors into account while creating this list. The minimum level of every Pokemon is 10. Pokemon that evolve by level use the minimum level they can obtain at. Pokemon that evolve at that level lower than 10 are meant to be encountered at level 10. Pokemon that evolve by trade happiness, items, or the conditions to obtain their levels to their previous stage. And finally, legendaries and mythical Pokemon mostly use the levels that they can be encountered at in previous games. In the series, Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, Mewtwo, Raikou, Entei, Suicune, Lugia, Oo, Latios, Kyogre, and Groudon use their encounter levels from Pokemon Heart Gold, Soul Silver. Uxie, Mesprit, Azelf, Dialga, Palkia, Gigas, Cresselia, and Shaman use their encounter levels, from Diamond and Pearl. Heatran and Giratina use their encounter levels from Platinum. Mew and Deoxys use their encounter levels from Emerald. The level of Darkrai doesn't seem to match with any encounters in previous games. Alright, and let's look at the unused overall sprites for these Pokemon. Alright, Pokemon Black and White and the sequels, the player could connect with the Pokemon Dream World to play minigames and encounter whatever that said. Most of the Pokemon have hidden abilities that could only be obtained through the Dream World back then. Some also knew special moves. In Black and White, no Gen 5 Pokemon could be encountered that way. About half of the Pokemon from the first 4 generations were available. About 270 were never distributed though. This renders their graphics as well as level data completely unused. The graphics were carried over. Alright, we don't need to see all that. We already know some of this. So yeah, about the levels, first of all, the minimum levels is always 10, no matter what. No Pokemon has a level less than 10. Alright, use Encounter Regigigas, level 71. Though that one unused. Level based evolutions used, yeah, we already went through all that. Doesn't look like even Shaman over here. So it's possible that we were originally going to encounter these Pokemon here instead of just through, like, events. So it definitely would have made things more interesting. At least you would have had to catch it and actually earn them instead of them just being handed to you, you know? Also, Brutalanda being one name for Summons is actually pretty sick. Never knew that. Not entirely sure which language that is. If anybody knows, please tell me. Alright, apparently Crows and Arceus were distributed through the Dream World at some point. I just had the breeding stages, as I mentioned. They were just available through events. Alright, I think that would be the end of that one. So things don't stall out too much. And here's the entire list of the Pokemon that you can encounter here that ended up going unused. As usual, pause the video. Don't hesitate to pause the video if you'd like to. And now we even get to some unused items. Some Pokemon, when encountered in the wild, have a chance of holding an item. Held items data also exists for some Pokemon which cannot be caught in the wild in the final game, rendering such assignments unused. And here's the whole list of them. Like Rattata with a Chilean berry being rare, or Pikachu with a light bulb being very rare, like we'll see that in later games like in X and Y. And then a lot of other things are like Rowlet and Arcanine with Ross berries, like we see in Heart Gold Soul Silver. So let's go over the list of them. A lot of these are just carried from previous or even later games, as I mentioned. Alright, next up, alternate form placeholder data for Kyurem. There exists placeholder data for an alternate form of Kyurem in Black and White, likely a placeholder for either Kyurem's true form that we still to this day at the time of making this video do not know, or its Black and White forms that we'll see in the game's sequel. There's a table within the game's coding that specifies the number of forms a Pokemon has. Pokemon that have no alternate forms are listed with the forms count 0, while Pokemon with alternate forms are listed with a number corresponding to the numbers from forms they have. For example, Pikachu has the number 0, while Deoxys has the number 4. There is one exception to this. Kyurem is the only Pokemon listed with the number 1. This number is meant to be a placeholder, meaning that at least one alternate form was in development. This was previously seen in the coding of Diamond Pearl, in which Rotom, Giratina, and Shaman had the number 1 listed. It is worth noting that Kyurem's 2 signature moves from the sequels, Freeze, Shock, and Ice Burn, also exist in Black and White. It's likely Black and White Kyurem were planned at some point, but glad they were saved for the sequel, honestly. Kyurem ended up with 2 new forms, Black Kyurem and White Kyurem, in Black and White 2. Tornadus, Thundurus, Landorus, and Keldeo, which all gain new forms in the sequels, are also listed with the number 0, suggesting that the alternate forms for these Pokemon are not developed until later. Makes sense. And same with Rotom, Giratina, and Shaman all getting forms in a later iteration, that being in Platinum. That's enough with unused Pokemon data. Next up, unused item data. This game has no balls, that's funny. Alright, unused items. Despite the large batch of unused leftover items from previous games, the developers introduced a handful of new unused items in Black and White, starting with TM95, which ended up being Snarl. This Dark-type TM teaches a Pokemon to move Snarl. It was originally meant to be obtained by opening the unused lock capsule item through a scrapped event. In the sequels, it can be obtained without an event, though. Prior to the sequels, the only way to get Snarl was to breed it from an event Zoroark or Smeargle that is sketched from it. Furthermore, it has a buy price of 10,000 Pokédollars. Or Pokemon dollars, whatever. Alright, locked capsule. This item was originally introduced in Heart Gold Soul Silver, but it was meant to serve a bigger role in Black and White. This unreleased event item was intended to be transferred to Black and White. However, it was never distributed. If the mystery gift to distribute it to Heart Gold Soul Silver was configured properly, the relocator even works. Taking it to Mr. Locke in Castelia City enables you to open it, revealing TM95, which contains Snarl. It is worth noting that this item sprite was updated from Gen 4. Alright, the Dragon Skull. The item temporarily receives this item. The player temporarily receives this item when retrieving it from Team Plasma in Pinwheel Forest. But due to the way the story events are scripted, the player immediately loses the item again. Therefore, this icon and description ends up unused. Alright, a skull of a Pokemon was said to have braved the angry waters to fly around the world, and if you couldn't tell, that was a Dragonite skull. Let me read the description of these two. The user yells as if it is ranting about something, making the target's special attack decrease. A sturdy capsule can only be opened with a special key. Alright, next up, the Godstone, the stone that originally Kyurem was going to be in. Notice how this coloration has the same color as Beta Kyurem's design, or Beta Kyurem's color scheme. So this tells us that the Godstone was thought of before Kyurem's design change. A gray recolor of the Light and Dark Stone, sprites whose name is dummied out in international releases. Its description seems to be unfinished as well. A rare stone. It's been speculated that this item is related to Kyurem, the third dragon member of the Tau Trio. However, Kyurem ends up serving a major role in the sequels. There's also a unique key the portrait is meant to use when obtaining the item. And here's a closer look at it. Alright, the leftover items. As starting this generation, Pokemon games inherit the item data from previous sets of games. I guess likely to save time in development when it comes to coding certain items. It's not surprising that a lot of items end up being unused during this process. This includes all key items from Pokemon Diamond and Pearl through to Heart Gold Soul Silver, apricorns, condition, boosting scarves, and more. Pokeballs. These Pokeballs are used for compatibility with Pokemon caught in the previous games, or from special events, but never actually obtained as bag items proper. The Safari and Cherish Balls work as normal Pokeballs. The remaining Pokeballs have no use, and they appear to be configured to be completely useless as they can't be made functional by editing the item parameters. Due to this trait, they cannot be held by Pokemon either. Alright, and here's a list of each of the different Pokeballs. Mostly just invented apricorn balls, it looks like. Alright, the apricorns. The player could obtain these items in Pokemon Heart Gold Soul Silver, where they can be crafted into special Pokeballs. However, like the actual Pokeballs, the developers found no use for these items in Generation 5 games. Unlike the respective Pokeballs, they function like normal items. They are properly sorted among all other non-held items as well. So as we never had an orange apricorn, or a purple one. Oh well. In the Sinnoh games, these scarves boost a specific contest condition when held. Since contests don't exist in Generation 5, in the Generation 5 games, these items were never meant to be used. Alright, red scarf, blue scarf, pink scarf, green scarf, and yellow scarf. Funnily enough, they share the same sprite with the muscle band item as well as the choice band item even. They're just colored differently. Wonder Launcher power-ups. There are several items used only in the Wonder Launcher multiplayer battle mode. These items are temporarily power-ups for Pokemon which are more potent than typical ones. If hacked into the bag, they can't actually be used. Most likely there's a failsafe for that. And since that's literally just doing battles, but you can use stat boosting items, which I'm glad that isn't allowed in competitive play, and we don't see that in any later games. Unseen asset changes. Despite not being used, some leftover items from Generation 4 had their icons and descriptions altered. Most of these are stylistic changes, but the changes for the fashion case and lost items stick out. The description for the former item implies that the fashion case originally stored props for the musical before the prop case was added to the game. The lost items depicted a Clefairy doll in Heart Gold Soul Silver, whereas in Black and White, it's been changed to a Mr. Armime Jr. doll. This sprite was likely lifted from an earlier version of the files from Heart Gold Soul Silver. The Lore Ball's new sprite would finally be used in Sun and Moon. Because apparently the Lore Ball was originally green in Heart Gold Soul Silver, which, not gonna lie, I don't remember it being green back then. I'm probably having a Mandela effect moment. I could have sworn it was blue back then. And then Black and White ends up being blue, but it's not in that game. Maybe that's why I think it was blue, because I remember seeing it at some point in the Gen 7 games. But here's the lost items, or the unused item sprites. I kind of prefer the spray for the locked capsule, not the one we actually got, so let's have a closer look at it. And even the park ball looking a little different. Kind of having a more unknown looking shape on here. It kind of looks like Unknown S, I think? I don't remember. And here's some descriptions of other items. Give you a second to read it if you'd like. A weirdly enough, unknown report and the red scales were used from our coastal silver. As well as some other things like the rainbow wing. Or the tidal bell. Alright, let's go back. And one last thing that we can look at before the end of this video. Let's look at some unused trainer data. Data from some dummied out trainers exists. Their names have been replaced with blank strings, and they all use at least one level 10 Patrat. And just different things. I guess at some point in development, N was going to have a level 10 Patrat. I want to say maybe during his fight in Accumulatown, but who knows. You want to fight a level 10 Pokemon that early on? I don't think so. Level 10 Patrat, 4 restores. Okay, dude. This is most likely just some placeholder trainers, even if this wasn't exactly what it was going to be meant to be. That's probably why every trainer here has 10 Patrats. Like, if we even count the different end fights over here, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This could represent the different end battles that we see throughout the game. Or even notice how there's 4 ends here. This could have been an early version of his seasonal battles that we see in the game sequel. That's my thought there, why it's 4 back-to-back right there. And maybe this veteran trainer down here could have been the early Miyamoto fight that we see in Castillo City. Or just a placeholder for it. I notice how N is also called Pokemon Trainer as well as Sharon over here. I think their names likely were in place there, that was just thought of beforehand. Like, thinking of this could have been for his Accumulatown fight, the Nacrane City fight, the Nimbasa City fight, the Chargestone Cave fight, and the fight in N's Castle after that. And then the seasonal fights I mentioned for Black and White too, so that's most likely why it's labeled that way. These other trainers, I want to say maybe some of these could be for the optional triple battles and rotation battles in Opelucid City. Probably a random biker on Route 9 if I had to guess for most of these. And I guess the rest, you probably just have some speculation on your own, I guess. No, I lied. I think we got a little more time. Why don't we also look at some unused map textures as well? Alright, unused fly spawn conditions. Maps that the player can fly to use conditions, or coordinates, why did I say conditions, that define where the player will appear when fast traveling, using in front of a Pokemon Center. However, several exterior locations also feature unused, mostly unfinished spawn conditions for use with fly. In the final game, the player cannot fast travel to any of these locations, as some of them are placed inside wall tiles, or out of bounds. It's likely that these are remnants of a lost debug feature. Alright, here's a closer look at Route 1, which is Route 1. Now let's go through these relatively quickly. Once again, if you'd like to pause at any time, don't hesitate to do so. Hilbert inside of a tree. Honestly, whatever he was standing on there kind of looks like Prismarine from Minecraft, weirdly enough. And he's just not even anywhere to be seen there. I guess you kind of see him in the trees there. And now he's floating. Should have had him on the water. He'd be Jesus. goes through these. And finally, the one picture in Undella Bay. Alright, unseen map features. The musical theater. The musical theater's dressing room is only used for in-game cutscenes, so the player isn't able to walk around this place freely. Using cheats, however, one can discover several unseen parts in the map. For one, there is a trash bin in the bottom right corner. However, there is also a rather long hallway to the left of the map. There are no actual warps to those maps, to other maps, so the doors and exits are purely cosmetic. Next up, the P2 laboratory. If the player uses cheats to walk through the walls inside the P2 laboratory, they can find this white mess with tables and trash cans. The model used here is actually an unfinished model of New Town. More on that matter below. And here's a closer look at this. And I guess the tables represent the different houses, and I guess trash can was the mailbox for the player's house? Most likely. Which New Town does kind of resemble Pallet Town a little bit, but I should have mentioned that during the Nuzlocke, honestly, but yeah. Prototype map models. Several prototype map models can be found in the game's files. They also exist in Black and White too. Likely as leftovers. Alright, M_theater03_00_0, and you got the little pop-eyed faces going on over here because of that. There's an unused and unfinished model, or map model, of a Tribune, excuse me. Most likely intended to be used for the musical theater. This model has no correlating tile sets and lives in a 1x1 map matrix that has no reference to the global map headers, even though the model clearly needs a left side to complete the house. There are correct movement permissions set for this map, including proper height and flag indicating an inability to jump off the fronts of the seats. The model is clearly incomplete, with the stage improperly done. Holes in the floor and no curtains. There is a plane indicating the height and rough size of the stage. It is relatively shallow, not unlike its 2D counterpart that replaced it in-game. Here's a closer look at that. Got the lattice over here too. I've seen stuff like that in both Unity and Unreal Engine before. It's nice to know that stuff existed before then, back in like the 2010s and stuff. As shown above, the P2 laboratory loads this model. Even though the file name shows that it was intended to be used for the P2 laboratory, the model itself actually reveals it to be an early version of New Town's model. The layout is very similar to the final version. Then again, the P2 laboratory is pretty close to where New Town is, so it kind of makes sense. Although the geometry is simpler, and the front shoreline lacks any of the detail present in the final version. The collision suggests that there was also a different model for the lab, and the models for what are apparently supposed to be the houses and labs have been replaced by parcels and tables. By the parcel and the table, respectively. Tileset 02 is the closest thing to a match, but the textures have clearly changed considerably since this map was made, and here's a closer look at that. If you do look closely, it does look like kind of an early version of New Town. Alright, M_Museum, just an early version of Nacrene City Museum. A different version of Nacrene City Museums exists in the ROMs of the game. It contains vastly different textures and modified movement permissions, as well as additional polygons that shouldn't be where they are. The version of the map in the video is a result of file swapping, so all the scripts of the original Nacrene Museum are used. The state of the room at the time suggests that this copy of the room could have been a damaged version of the room, given events from early on in the game with Team Plasma, or that it could have been had a debugging features at one time, excuse me, I can't read. Additionally, this room shows that at one point there was only one entry point into the gymnasium, as opposed to 3. And here's a closer look at that. Another early image, this time with an X transceiver or a C gear background that we don't see in the final game, this purloin one. Now let's look at this little video over here. Just gonna skip through that. And the dragon skull is just kind of hanging there where the Dragonite skeleton's supposed to be. And there seems to be something in the void over there. Let's just speed things up a little. I had a vending machine. I don't remember that being there in the final. And that NPCs there, unlike in one of the previous videos we saw in the previous episode. Continuing. So let's go over a few differences. Completely different textures that aren't used anywhere else in the game. Some polygons are missing, and there are some additional polygons. There are no artifacts on the shelves, and the signs to denote what the item on the table is and replaces with flower spots. There is a soda machine and a sign on the wall that aren't present in the final game, and I was right. The doorway leading to the gym has the movement permission of a doorway that is 3 spaces wide, but only uses 1 space. There's a random unused polygon. There is probably in the void as I mentioned earlier. There's a doormat at the entrance to the building. And finally, there are incorrect movement permissions. And unused building models. Investigate. I recall there being several prototype ones, and there isn't anything here, as you can see. And Team Plasma tried to replicate in Vivid Town. Funny that. And the Plague of Pirate Rats I should have mentioned before. Alright, I think in the next episode, we'll go over some unused graphics as well as unused text, and the rest of this unused stuff down here for the final part, that being part 11 of Unused Content Gaming for Pokemon Black and White. So if you all enjoy this, learn something new, and you want to see more, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And as usual, consider answering the question today. Of all of the unused content we went over today, what of you would like to see in the final game and why? Maybe the Manaphy would have been pretty damn cool. Having another way to get Manaphy in the DS games would have been pretty nice. So that would be my answer for that. But whatever your answer is, please leave it in the comments below. Anyways, in the final part, as I mentioned before, we'll go over these 3 things. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and have a terrific day. See you in the final parts.